All right, so we are going to begin solving multi-step equations today. And when we look at our multi-step equations, the goal of solving an equation is to isolate the variable. So we are going to try to get the variable by itself on one side of the equation and all of the numbers on the other side of the equations. Now, to isolate the variable, we use what we call inverse operations. So an inverse operation reverses the effects of the first operation. So if we have addition, the inverse is subtraction. If we have subtraction, the inverse is addition. If we have multiplication, the inverse is division. If we have division, the inverse is multiplication. So here we have some examples of problems. We're going to use these as 3-column notes. So here in the first column, I will not be writing anything. You shouldn't either. This is for when you go back before a quiz or an assessment and you can practice this problem again. In this column, I'll be writing the steps of the problem. And in this column, I'll be writing the process that I'm using to complete the problem. So if we look at our first problem here, we see x plus 1 is equal to 2. I want to isolate that variable x by itself. And so I see plus 1. My operation is addition, so my inverse operation is subtraction. So to solve this, I'm going to subtract 1. That'll cancel out the positive 1 and the negative 1, leaving me with x. 2 minus 1 gives me a 1. If I go to check this and substitute the variable, substitute 1 in for the variable, I would have 1 plus 1 equals 2, and that is correct. So I do know that my answer here is x equals 1. On the next one, I see 2x minus 10 equals negative 20. So I'm going to start with that negative 10. And so since I see subtract 10, I'm going to work with the inverse and I'm going to add 10. That will cancel out the negative 10 and the positive 10, leaving me with 2x. And then negative 20 plus 10 will give me a negative 10. Now the next operation I see is 2 times x. And so since that is multiplication, I'm going to use the inverse and I'm going to divide by 2. And so when I divide by 2, I'm going to get that the x is equal to negative 5. If I check, I can substitute in negative 5 for the x in the original problem. And then I could either use mental math or my calculator. Negative 5 times 2 is negative 10, minus 10 is negative 20. And so this is my correct answer, x equals negative 5. All right, if I look at the next one, I see 1/2 x plus 30 equals 10. So I'm going to start with this plus 30 and work with my inverse and subtract 30. That will give me 1/2 x is equal to a negative 20. Now what I see here is that I have a fractional coefficient. So I have that 1/2, and therefore I'm going to take and multiply by the reciprocal, which would be 2, or 2 over 1. When I multiply by the reciprocal, 2 over 1 times 1/2 leaves me with 1x, which is what I want, that variable isolated. And negative 20 times 2 gives me negative 40. I'm then going to check, and I'm going to substitute in negative 40 for x into the original problem. If I take half of negative 40, that would be negative 20. And negative 20 plus 30 does equal 10. And so my answer is negative 40. So with these three problems here, we have worked with our inverse operations to be able to isolate the variable, and we have also checked our answers. All right, we're going to continue on with our solving of multi-step equations. You'll notice that the problems on this page contain more distributive property and combine like terms. And so we're linking last chapter with our current chapter. And the first thing we're going to do here with our problem is we're going to take and do the distributive property. Once again, I'm using the 3-column notes. I will not be writing anything in this column. That's for you to do when you are practicing for a quiz or assessment. I'll be doing the steps in this problem, and I'll be writing down the thought process that we're going through in this column. Okay, and I'm going to take and do the distributive property here, and this is going to be 2x minus 8 equals negative 24. So my first step was distributive property. I'm now going to take and work with my inverse operations. I see this subtract 8, and I'm going to add 8. That will leave me with 2x equals a negative 16. And then now I see 2 times x, and our operation is multiplication, our inverse is division, so I'm going to now divide by 2, and that is going to give me that x is equal to negative 8. Keep in mind, we can still always check ourselves by substituting the value that we get, negative 8, back in for x, and just following order of operations, making sure that the right side of the equation equals the left side of the equation. All right, and the next one here, I am also going to start with the distributive property. I'm going to drop down the 3, and I'll be distributing a negative 2. So I will have negative 2x, and then minus 8 equals 20. Before I get into working with any inverses, I will need to take and combine like terms. And so the negative 2x does not combine with anything, but I have a 3 and a negative 8 that's going to combine for a negative 5. I'm now going to be able to start to work with inverses. I see a negative 5, and so I'm now going to add 5. That will leave me with negative 2x equals 25. I see a negative 2 times x, and so the inverse of multiplication is to divide. So now I'll be dividing by negative 2. And x will now equal a negative 25 over 2, or negative 12 and 1/2, or negative 12.5. All right. In our last problem here, we do need to start by combining like terms. I see that I have a 2x and a negative 3x that will combine for a negative 1x. And I have a positive 10 and a positive 4, and that will combine for 14. I'm now ready to work with inverse operations. I see plus 14, so I will use my inverse and subtract 14. I now have negative x. I want positive x isolated. And so since that is negative 1 times x, I will now need to divide by negative 1. And that will give me x is equal to 26. Okay. Please make sure that you complete the Math Excel practice titled September 2nd.